Syria's military has rushed in reinforcements to try to push back anti-government rebels after they swept through the city of Aleppo in a surprise escalation in the country's civil war. Now, to tell us more, we're joined now by our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons. John, what is happening in Syria?
Well, Gemma, it's pretty dramatic. While so many of the key players like Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and others were focused on other conflicts. This rebel group, who've been they retreated to Idlib, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group. They began as Jabhat al-Nusra, then fell out with al-Qaeda. But they had sort of moved up to Idlib and that had become their new base. Anyway, they've obviously been sitting there in recent times watching the lay of the land in the Middle East, and they've finally decided to strike. And remarkably were able to come in and take the second largest city, Aleppo. And the Assad regime, who controls Syria, it's a pretty brutal, ruthless machine there with a brutal army, and yet they were completely taken by surprise. It's actually very dramatic.
Now, this main group, which we can also refer to as HTS, who are they? What do they want?
Well, HTS is a hardline Salafist group, and they began, as I said, as Jabhat al-Nusra. They were part of the many groups who were fighting the Assad regime going back 10 years. The Assad regime managed to recapture a lot of parts of Syria. There's still parts of Syria, like the Kurdish parts and Idlib, where the HTS group are, that they haven't been able to take. Anyway, the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah helped Bashar al-Assad fend off the many attacks against him, beginning around 2009, 2010 and 11. And the Assad regime was involved in a brutal civil war for some years, managed to mainly win that and to establish some sort of stability. So this group, though, didn't go away. It's been regrouping, obviously, and it's an audacious and a spectacular move. And they're not only now, they're not just Aleppo, they're now pushing further south towards Hama. And it's interesting that the Syrian army basically appears just to have fled Aleppo, which is this wonderful, big, historic city, beautiful castles and beautiful old city. It's also the commercial centre of Syria. So the fact that essentially the Syrian army weren't able to hold that says a lot about what's going on.
We touched on timing a moment ago, but tell us more about that. Why now?
Well, I think that obviously Russia is now distracted very much in the bitter war in Ukraine. That's escalating, so that's Russia's main focus. Russia appears to be involved in the uprising or unrest going on in Georgia. And Iran, of course, through their proxy Hezbollah, has been completely distracted. Hezbollah's taken a pounding from the Israelis in southern Lebanon. So I think they thought two of the key supporters of Assad, Russia, Iran, and then add to that Hezbollah, the proxy, are all distracted in other theatres of war. Now is our chance to strike, and it was very effective.
So what has been the response so far, and what can we expect in the days and weeks ahead here?
The response now is the Russians are now trying to bomb Aleppo, which I think is, I don't think it will succeed at all, because Aleppo is literally fortified as old, fortresses there. So it's not going to hit the rebels, apart from the Syrian army going back in on ground with ground troops trying to force out the rebels. And the locals in Aleppo appear to be quite relaxed about the rebels coming in, quite pleased in a way, because a lot of them do not like Bashar al-Assad.
So where does that leave al-Assad and his regime?
Well, it leaves him very vulnerable. He's got yet another problem area. If they manage to get momentum and if other groups come in, there are so many different fractured groups of anti-Assad groups inside Syria. If they start joining with the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and start trying to push towards Damascus, then Bashar al-Assad will have to do, as he did during a lot of the civil war. He placed a sort of defensive ring around Damascus, the capital. He may well have to do that again to try to make sure this group doesn't get in there. And Russia will be trying to rush reinforcements to him as soon as possible, as they're doing now with bombing. But it'll be interesting too whether Hezbollah plays any role. I think they're too weakened from the war with Israel to be able to send any troops.